Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about the Variety article that reports that David Zaslav and Warner Bros. Discovery are thinking of overhauling DC Entertainment. Now, I know this information was released on April 14th, and now we are a couple of days past that, but I wanted to take my time to fully understand this article and what it means for DC. I didn't want to be biased in my explanation, and so taking this extra time means this will be a pretty level-headed video. So, what did the article say? Variety stated that David Zaslav and top leadership have been toying with the idea of turning DC into its own solidified content vertical, the sources said. The move would potentially affect DC feature film development in the Warner Bros. Pictures Group, streaming series at Warner Bros. Television, and the creative arm within DC proper, all in an effort to have the disparate elements more closely aligned in order to maximize the value of the superhero stable, one often seen as punching up against Marvel. It also states that Emma Watts will not be taking the job as creative and strategic czar, but Zaslav may be looking at someone who had the type of business background needed to keep all the different factions at DC working more harmoniously. Discovery insiders believe that although DC has achieved cinematic success with recent films such as Aquaman and The Batman, it lacks a coherent creative and brand strategy. Discovery believes that several top-shelf characters such as Superman have been left to languish and need to be revitalized. They also believe that projects like Todd Phillips' Joker are a shining example of how second-build characters from the DC library can and should be exploited. Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn is another example. Zaslav has pledged to find $3 billion in synergies in the newly merged company, a signal of how important cost-cutting will be to Warner's new owners. Mining DC's library of characters could help control spending as Warner Bros. Discovery owns the underlying intellectual property, insiders say. Now that is all the important information the article states. The rest is really just their opinion on what they think should happen. So we start with the first paragraph, where it states Discovery are looking at basically turning DC into their own studio. I think this is a great move, and I think it is something that a lot of fans have said for a while. It then goes on to stating that Zaslav is pretty much looking for a Kevin Feige for the DC universe. Yet again, that is great news. The DC universe needs someone to overlook every project to make sure it fits with an overall story, one that audiences can follow. That's further emphasized in the next paragraph, stating that even though films like Aquaman and The Batman have achieved cinematic success recently, DC still lacks a coherent creative and brand strategy. Once again, absolutely correct. Just look at everything the DCEU has created, and you can clearly see that there has been about 3 different plans within the last 6 years. A plan that no one really follows and has made general audiences distance themselves from the DC brand. The films may be good, but there is no way anyone can say that there is a coherent, creative and brand strategy. Cost cutting seems to be something Zaslav is interested in, and I think it is a good idea too. Within DC, I think Warner Bros. Have wasted a lot of money on marketing, with films like Batman v Superman and The Batman both having marketing budgets of $150 million. That is where I would cut costs, not necessarily on budgets for production, but for promotion. The final paragraph talks about how top characters like Superman have been left to languish and need to be revitalized. More great news! Not only is Superman my favourite DC character, but he is also one of, if not the biggest DC superhero of all time, and we haven't seen him since 2017 in one of the worst DC films ever made. Now, going over the entire article, I would have to say this. The fact that Discovery have already identified the problem with DC is all the evidence you need to see that the people currently in charge of DC are not good enough. Fans have been saying it for years, and now we finally have people in charge who can see it too. The article talks about how Zaslav thinks there have been a lack of coherent creative and brand strategy. You cannot blame the directors for that. That is on the people in charge of DC and Warner Bros. Pictures, who just so happen to be Toby Emmerich and Walter Hamada. Now, it looks like with this news and the potential creation of DC Studios, Emmerich will be far away from DC, and I personally believe that Hamada should be away from DC too. The lack of vision and strategy falls on his shoulders too. DC has simply not been good enough, not necessarily in terms of the films they have released, but in terms of building a strong universe and a strong audience. Marvel almost don't need to promote their films anymore, as their customers are so loyal to their brand. DC have to try so hard to get people to go see their new films, as they never bothered to build a loyal audience, or they alienated that audience long ago. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. All I've ever wanted is a better DC universe. This Discovery merger looks like it will do that. Whether that be through a reboot or restoring the Snyderverse, or just planning out a long-term DC universe that they stick to, I think the DC universe will only get better from here, because at least we will have a plan. Now, do I think the Snyderverse will be restored? Honestly, it's pretty hard to tell right now. I think they should, and I have an idea that incorporates every possibility for the DC universe. Now, this idea isn't what I would do if I was in charge of the DCEU. If I was in charge, I would use The Flash to clearly split the Snyderverse and the new DCEU into two, and allow both storylines to be fully explored. But this idea I have would incorporate carrying on with the DCEU, restoring the Snyderverse, and rebooting the DC universe. The idea would be to roll out the DC films for 2022 and 2023. You have the Flash film, which is the final film of that slate, and in that film, you push Affleck's Batman into the Snyderverse, setting up Justice League 2 and 3. You then create those two final films, with the ending being the Flash running back in time and resetting the DCEU, which would mean the only long-term storyline DC ever had planned would be complete. It would be a great send-off for all the characters and means the DCEU can start from scratch again. Obviously, in an ideal world, that wouldn't be the plan, but I think it's the plan that works the best with what seems to be going on. I said this on Twitter, but I'll say it here too. I can see why a reboot of the DCEU makes sense. No matter where you stand, DC fans are divided. A reboot brings everyone together again. Start afresh, full plan from the start, and slowly working your way up. There would be no hashtag this or that, just DC films that all fans can be excited for. Obviously, I want the Snyderverse to be restored, as in Justice League 2 and 3, and I am nowhere near giving up or losing hope. But if it doesn't happen and a reboot happens instead, I won't be massively upset, as I think for every DC fan, it is a healthy decision. It wouldn't be Snyderverse fans versus other factions of DC fans, it would simply be DC fans talking about DC films. I've said in the past how I massively prefer talking to MCU fans over DC fans because there are almost no factions within the MCU fandom. It's simply fans talking about the MCU, and it is far less toxic. DC fans seem to always argue amongst each other as there is such a huge divide in what fans want to see, and Warner Brothers are the ones to blame. Instead of sticking to one mindset for the DCEU, they gave DC fans too many options. They gave a dark and serious tone, they then went with a humorous and light-hearted tone, and recently, it seems like they were just greenlighting anything and hoping it does well. They allowed DC fans to become loyal to a style they preferred, but Warner Brothers never followed through with any of it, instead just switching it up whenever they felt like it. A reboot would unfortunately solve that, bringing in a Kevin Feige type person to create a long-term plan for the DCEU, establishing a tone and storyline from the start that they stick to, would be the safest financial option for DC Studios. Now, I think a reboot is the last resort, as I really think the DCEU can be easily fixed, but I'm saying it is on the cards. The Snyderverse is still very much a possibility, and we shouldn't give up. I see it as this: the DC universe will massively improve under Warner Brothers Discovery, and the Snyderverse being restored would be an incredible bonus. So, are you excited for the future of DC Studios, and do you think the Snyderverse will be restored under this new management? Let me know in the comments below. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I hope to see you here again soon, so until then, have a great day. Bye!